Detective Mara Jensen had seen her share of nightmares over the years, but nothing prepared her for the case that would unravel the fabric of her soul. It began with a gruesome discovery on a rain-soaked night in the industrial district of the city, a lifeless body arranged in a disturbing tableau that mimicked one of the 7 deadly sins. Mara stood in the alley, the neon glow from a flickering sign barely illuminating the horror before her. The victim, a middle-aged man, lay contorted in agony with wounds meticulously arranged to portray greed. His once pristine suit was torn, money fluttering from his pockets like wounded birds. Every detail was a deliberate message, a signature of a killer who was not only methodical but possessed a twisted sense of morality. In the days that followed, the city became a grim stage for the killer's macabre performance. Each new crime scene was more harrowing than the last. The murders were calculated, each echoing the 7 deadly sins: greed, gluttony, envy, sloth, wrath, pride, and lust. It was as if the killer sought to cleanse the world of its inherent sins by inflicting suffering that was as poetic as it was brutal. Mara's partner, Detective Elias Carter, was skeptical of any symbolic meaning at first. But as more victims were discovered, each staged with disturbing precision, the evidence mounted. There was something almost ritualistic in the presentation. The killer left clues, subtle nods to ancient texts and parables about sin and retribution, as if trying to force the police and the world to confront the darkest corners of human nature. The first victim, as mentioned, was a wealthy financier known for his ruthless business tactics. The scene had been artfully arranged in an abandoned warehouse. Mara recalled the blood on the floor forming a pattern that resembled a set of scales, a grim reminder that every act of greed is balanced by a weighty cost. The killer had carved the word avarice into the victim's chest, the letters grotesquely distorted, as if the act itself was a punishment for a lifetime of exploiting others. That night, Mara's dreams were haunted by visions of golden coins raining down, each one stained with blood. In the echo of her nightmares, the financier's face morphed into a monstrous figure of greed. She awoke in cold sweat, haunted by the thought that the killer was not merely an offender but a philosophical executioner, determined to expose the festering sins that lurked beneath society's veneer. 2 weeks later, a new body was found in a derelict restaurant. The victim, a once celebrated chef who had been the toast of the city's elite, was discovered in a state of grotesque decay. The killer had turned the scene into a nightmarish banquet, rotten, overripe food scattered around the body, and the victim's mouth agape in a silent scream of gluttony. The chef had been known for his excess, his indulgence in every luxury life had to offer, but his downfall had come in the form of unrestrained appetites that ultimately led him to ruin. The killer had left a final message, an old, faded menu with the word gluttony scrawled across it in hasty, desperate ink. For Mara, it was a sign that the murderer was not only an artist of pain but a bitter critic of human nature's excesses. The meticulous staging of the scene revealed the killer's intent to expose the hidden truths of overindulgence, as if every course in that fated meal was a moral lesson. As the murders continued, the killer's signature became undeniable. The third victim was a renowned artist, celebrated for his controversial works that critiqued societal norms. Yet in his own life, envy had taken root. His studio was found in disarray, canvases splattered with violent hues and messages scrawled in a mixture of blood and paint. The killer had inflicted wounds that symbolized envy, deep, jagged cuts across the body, as if the victim had been clawed by the very hand of jealousy. The scene was disturbing not only for its brutality but for the chaotic blend of beauty and horror it represented. Mara's mind raced with questions. Was the killer himself driven by envy, compelled to mimic what he saw as the cursed traits of those around him? The artist's eyes, wide open in silent torment, seemed to reflect an eternal struggle, a fight against the envy that had consumed his soul. One particularly bleak morning, the body of a notorious slacker, a man whose life had been a series of idle routines and missed opportunities, was found in a dingy apartment. The room was littered with remnants of a life unfulfilled, empty bottles, discarded fast food containers, and a pervasive sense of decay. The killer had taken the victim's apathy and turned it into a macabre spectacle. The victim's face was frozen in a grimace of indifference, his body positioned as if he had fallen asleep mid-mortem, the word sloth etched in crude handwriting across his forehead. For Mara, the scene was particularly unsettling. It was as though the killer had not only condemned the victim for his lack of ambition but had also issued a broader indictment of societal lethargy, a warning that inaction and complacency could lead to a slow, agonizing death. Perhaps the most visceral of the killer's creations was the murder inspired by wrath. This time, the victim was a man known for his violent temper, a person whose rage had wrought destruction in his personal and professional life. The crime scene was a chaotic inferno. The victim's body was found in an abandoned lot, surrounded by charred debris and splashes of red that bore a disturbing resemblance to the mark of wrath. Mara could still recall the echo of his screams, lingering in the minds of those who discovered the scene. The killer had arranged the environment to mimic a scene of violent retribution, a last brutal act of punishment for a life defined by uncontrolled fury. The air was thick with the scent of burnt flesh and a warning that anger, unchecked and unbridled, can consume even the strongest of wills. As if the killer's gruesome lessons weren't enough, the sixth act was perhaps the most ironic. The victim was a celebrated public figure, a politician known for his unwavering confidence and pride in his accomplishments. His fall from grace was symbolized by the scene, a lavish study now tainted by a meticulously arranged display of hubris. The walls were adorned with mirrors that reflected the victim's once admired visage, now distorted by the evidence of his own downfall. The killer had left behind a single cryptic note bearing the word pride in an ornate script. For Mara, it was a grim reminder that pride often precedes a fall, and that the weight of arrogance can lead to a catastrophic collapse. The study, once a sanctuary of power, had been transformed into a mausoleum of shattered dreams and narcissistic ruin. The final act was the most chilling of all. The victim, a notorious seducer whose charm and debauchery had ensnared countless lives, was found in a luxurious hotel room. The scene was a perverse tableau of desire and decay, a stark contrast to the overt violence of the previous murders. The killer had orchestrated an elaborate display of lust, with the victim's body arranged in an almost ritualistic pose, as if in the throes of an eternal damned passion. The room was littered with remnants of past encounters, whispered promises and fleeting moments of pleasure, now twisted into a dark parody of intimacy. A solitary rose, blackened by time and neglect, lay beside the body with the word lust etched onto its petals. Mara couldn't shake the feeling that this final act was not just about condemning sin but about offering a grim commentary on the ephemeral nature of desire, a stark warning that the pursuit of pleasure, when left unchecked, could lead to an irreversible descent into darkness. The investigation consumed Mara. With every piece of evidence, every cryptic clue left by the killer, the detectives delved deeper into a world where morality was not just a guideline but a battlefield. Each crime scene became a mirror reflecting the darker aspects of humanity: greed, gluttony, envy, sloth, wrath, pride, and lust. And with each discovery, Mara's own inner demons began to surface. Late nights in the interrogation room blurred with the dread of the next potential victim. In the quiet hours before dawn, Mara found herself wandering the empty corridors of her mind, questioning the very nature of sin. Was the killer a twisted moralist, intent on purifying society through pain? Or was he merely a reflection of a world gone mad, a harbinger of chaos, preying on the frailties of human existence? The case took a toll on her relationships. Friends and colleagues noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the haunted look that had replaced her once steady gaze. Elias tried to reassure her, reminding her that they were doing everything possible to stop the killer. But deep down, Mara feared that with each passing day, the line between right and wrong was becoming blurred, a delicate balance teetering on the edge of collapse. One night, as thunder rumbled in the distance, Mara returned to the precinct after another long day of chasing leads. In her solitude, she began to assemble the clues on a corkboard in her small office, a mosaic of photos, newspaper clippings, and hastily scribbled notes. The images of the victims stared back at her, their silent testimonies to a life extinguished by sins both old and new. It was then that a chilling realization struck her. Each crime scene was a piece of a larger puzzle, a commentary on a society that had lost its moral compass. The killer wasn't random. He was deliberate, his every act a calculated message. The more she examined the evidence, the more she understood that the true horror lay not in the violence itself but in the reflection of a humanity that had become so callous, so indifferent to its own decay. Weeks turned into a tense, sleepless vigil as the detectives raced against time to decipher the killer's final message. Rumors began to circulate that the mastermind behind the murders had left one final cryptic clue, a note that alluded to a culmination, an ultimate act that would force the city to confront its own sins. The note read only, "The last sin is yet to be born." Mara's heart pounded as she pieced together the fragments of the case. Every lead, every scrap of evidence pointed to a man who had been hiding in plain sight, a man who had always been one step ahead. Late one rainy evening, as the city drowned in a relentless downpour, Mara received a call that chilled her to the core. There had been a disturbance in a secluded mansion on the outskirts of the city. With Elias by her side, she raced to the scene, every instinct screaming that this was it, the final act. The mansion, once a proud relic of a bygone era, now loomed like a specter among the twisted trees. As they entered the foyer, the air was thick with the scent of decay and despair. Every step echoed as if in a haunted dance, and Mara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led into a trap. In the grand parlor, a tableau awaited them, the body of a person unknown, arranged in an almost sacrificial pose. In the center of the scene lay an ornate box, its lid inscribed with the final sin, an enigma that defied simple categorization. In that moment, Mara felt a surge of both dread and determination. The killer had always been elusive, a phantom in the shadows, and yet every twisted piece of his work had led her here. Elias moved to secure the perimeter, while Mara approached the box with trembling hands. Inside, she found a series of photographs and personal items, each linked to influential figures in the city. It was a map of corruption, a tapestry woven with the threads of power, greed, and moral decay. As the clock ticked, Mara's mind raced. She realized that the final sin wasn't just about one individual. It was a mirror held up to society itself. The killer's elaborate game was a final attempt to reveal the rot beneath the glittering facade of civilization. In that moment, the weight of the case pressed down on her like a physical force, an unbearable truth that perhaps the real horror was not the murderer, but the monstrous potential for sin that lay dormant in every human heart. With a deep breath, Mara dialed the number on one of the photographs, a number she recognized all too well. The line rang and a cold, calculated voice answered. "You've played your part well, Detective Jensen," it said. "But the final act is yet to come. Are you ready to face the truth about us all?" Mara's pulse pounded in her ears as she realized the horrifying implication. The killer was not alone. He was part of a larger design, a network of corruption and moral decay that spanned every stratum of society. The realization was almost too much to bear, a confrontation with a truth so grim that it threatened to shatter her resolve. In the hours that followed, the investigation took on a desperate urgency. Mara and Elias combed through every lead, every dark corner of the city, desperate to unravel the conspiracy that the killer had so meticulously laid out. With each revelation, Mara felt herself descending into a labyrinth of guilt and despair, a place where the boundaries between justice and retribution blurred, and every soul was tainted by sin. Months later, as the city slowly recovered from the terror that had gripped it, Detective Mara Jensen sat alone in her dimly lit apartment. The case had left scars that ran deeper than any physical wound, memories of horror that would haunt her for years to come. The killer, whoever he was, had vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only echoes of a final, unanswerable question. How could humanity harbor such darkness? The photographs and evidence remained locked in a cold case file on her desk, a grim reminder of the price of truth. Every time Mara looked at them, she was forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that sin was not an abstract concept but a tangible force, lurking in the hearts of those who walked the city streets. In the quiet moments before sleep, Mara would sometimes hear the soft, haunting whisper of a voice, an echo of the killer's final words. "The final sin is yet to be born." And in those moments she knew that the fight was not over. The battle against darkness was eternal, and every day was a struggle to keep the light of morality burning amidst the encroaching shadows. For Mara, the case had become a personal crusade, a commitment to unmask the hidden evils that lay beneath the surface of everyday life. And though the killer had eluded capture, his legacy was undeniable, a stark revelation of the fragile nature of humanity, and a warning that sometimes, the true horror is not the monster in the alley, but the sins that reside within us all. In the end, the city's nightmares did not end with one case or one killer. They lived on in every act of greed, every burst of uncontrolled wrath, every indulgence in excess. They were the shadows of our collective soul, a dark mirror reflecting the sins we dare not admit, and the horror that lingers long after the lights have gone out. Mara's journey had transformed her. No longer could she see the world as a place of simple black and white. The case had painted it in shades of deep, unyielding gray. And as she stared out at the rain-soaked streets, she resolved to continue her relentless pursuit of justice. A fight against the inevitable decay of human nature. A fight against the darkness that each of us carries within. This story, spanning the 7 symbolic sins and culminating in a haunting confrontation with the nature of evil, is a reminder that horror is not only found in the actions of a twisted killer but also in the depths of our own flawed humanity.
That's it for tonight's tale. But don't worry, there's always more where that came from. Be sure to stay tuned for even more nerve-thrilling horror stories every single week. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join us here at the Hollow Horror. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, stay safe. Or stay scared. See you next time.